If you follow the NFL, you probably know the name
Damar Hamlin.
Damar Hamlin.
Damar Hamlin.
Damar Hamlin.
Damar Hamlin is the one who was in on that stop on T. Higgins, and then he got up and just went right back down to the ground.
Let's talk about it. What happened to Damar Hamlin was medically ruled Commotio Cordis. We'll go over the pathophysiology in a second, but first we're going to go over the normal physiology and anatomy of the human heart. The human heart is a vital organ in the circulatory system, and an incredible muscle that tirelessly propels blood throughout the body. The heart is divided into 4 chambers, 2 atria and 2 ventricles. Deoxygenated blood enters the right atrium, then flows into the right ventricle. From there, it's pumped to the lungs for oxygenation. Oxygenated blood returns to the left atrium, passes into the left ventricle, and is then pumped everywhere else in the body. A network of valves in the heart ensures a unidirectional flow of blood, avoiding regurgitation. At its core, the heart operates as a remarkable hydraulic pump. Its muscular walls contract
systole
and relax
diastole
with each heartbeat. This dynamic process involves pressure differentials. During
systole,
the ventricles contract, increasing pressure and forcing blood into arteries. During
diastole,
the ventricles relax, lowering pressure and allowing chambers to refill. Our hydraulic pump is run by electricity, so let's talk wiring. It begins in the sinoatrial node, or the SA node, the natural pacemaker of the heart, initiating electrical impulses that prompt atrial contraction. The signal then travels to the atrioventricular node, or AV node, slowing down momentarily to allow the ventricles to fill. From the AV node, the impulse travels down the bundle of His, a specialized pathway that divides into Purkinje fibers. These fibers rapidly distribute the signal across the ventricles, stimulating coordinated and powerful contractions. At a cellular level, the initiation of electrical signals relies on dynamic ion movements driven by concentration gradients. Sodium ions rush into the cell due to the higher concentration outside, creating a positive charge. In the plateau phase, calcium ions enter through voltage-gated channels. The concentration gradient along with the electrochemical gradient facilitates calcium influx, contributing to the sustained depolarization at the AV node to allow time for the ventricles to fill, as we previously mentioned. Repolarization follows as potassium ions exit the cell, driven by concentration and electrochemical gradients as well, restoring the negative charge inside and preparing the heart for another cycle of depolarization and contractions. One incredible tool that graphs the electrical path of the heart in real time is called the electrocardiogram, or ECG. On an electrocardiogram, or ECG, we get a good look at the electrical activity taking place in the heart in real time. In an ECG, the P wave represents atrial depolarization. The QRS complex signifies ventricular depolarization, and the T wave indicates ventricular repolarization. In the QRS complex, the initial downward deflection, or Q wave, corresponds to the depolarization of the interventricular septum, where the bundle of His separates into paths of the left and right bundle branches leading to the Purkinje fibers, which innervate the entirety of the ventricles. The subsequent upward deflection, or R wave, represents the bulk of ventricular depolarization, or the upward travel of electricity from the apex of the heart and traveling superior throughout the complete musculature of the ventricles. Now it's time to bring all of that regular stuff together so that we can talk about the problem. Commotio Cordis. The history of Commotio Cordis is really interesting because of how rare Commotio Cordis actually is. What is currently thought to possibly be the oldest accounting of Commotio Cordis is Dim Mak. Dim Mak, commonly known as the Death Touch, has an elusive history with roots in ancient Chinese martial arts and traditional medicine. While legends suggest its existence for over a millennium, the term Dim Mak gained prominence in the 20th century. Specific dates regarding its origin are challenging to pinpoint due to the mystical nature surrounding the technique. However, it is firmly rooted in the traditional Chinese martial arts philosophy. This technique includes many points at which one's qi is vulnerable, including strikes to the solar plexus, which has been recorded in some cases in our modern day as a contributor to Commotio Cordis. The accountings of this technique include many stories of a striker so powerful and skillful that he could cause the soul to leave the body, and the body becomes pulseless. Modern medicine calls this sudden death. The most reliable first accounting that we have for sure, however, is allegedly from 1763 with no formal documentation until some 1870 studies providing an idea as to what may be taking place, and a 1930 study that provided a better groundwork for understanding and studying the pathophysiology by its known name in the future. This stunning lack of research on the subject matter is due in part to the factors that make Commotio Cordis such a rarity. The number of annual cases of Commotio Cordis is limited to less than 30, usually between 20 and 30 cases per year, with around 15 to 20 of the cases resulting in death. Averaging the annual cases of Commotio Cordis deaths provides us with a figure of 17.5 annual deaths. This means that in the USA, it is 1.25 times more likely to be killed by a cow, 1.77 times more likely to be killed by a dog, 2.23 times more likely to be killed by lightning, 3.03 times more likely to be killed by a bee, and 13.77 times more likely to be killed by a tractor. Commotio Cordis falls under the category of R-on-T phenomena. As we discussed in the regular physiology, an R wave is the massive upward deflection on an ECG representing the depolarization of the ventricles from the apex of the heart traveling upward. The T wave represents repolarization of the ventricles. But why is the T wave the only time these phenomena can occur? During the T wave, the cells are in the process of restoring their electrical balance, and the cell membranes are thus more permeable to ions. If any external force such as a blunt impact to the chest occurs during this vulnerable period, it can disrupt the delicate electrical balance, leading to abnormal electrical impulses and potentially triggering arrhythmias like ventricular fibrillation. The list of R-on-T phenomena includes Commotio Cordis, long QT syndrome, and cardiac devices such as pacemakers and defibrillators that are not programmed to avoid R-on-T occurrence. The timing for Commotio Cordis is even more specific than the entirety of the T wave, though. The critical window within the T wave in which Commotio Cordis could reliably take place is approximately 15 milliseconds, which is on average between 1/6 and 1/7 of the literal physical blink of an eye. Another contribution to the rarity of Commotio Cordis outside of the timing would be the specific force. More likely than Commotio Cordis is its counterpart Contusio Cordis, in which the heart suffers direct tissue damage, but oddly enough no sudden death or ventricular fibrillation from the impact. Only pathologies secondary to tissue damage have ever been recorded. Why might this be the case? Critical mass theory of Commotio Cordis dictates that 50+ mph impacts are less likely to cause ventricular fibrillation and the potentially subsequent sudden death because the tissues, when damaged, cannot sustain arrhythmias like ventricular fibrillation. While Contusio Cordis is typically caused by car accidents, the few cases of Commotio Cordis are commonly found in children's baseball. This calls to memory the specifications of a 1990 study including pigs and recreations of Commotio Cordis, which used various baseballs all at a mass of 150 grams at a velocity of 48 kilometers per hour, or roughly 0.3 pounds and 30 miles per hour in freedoms per eagle. Which, if you follow baseball at all, you would understand that 30 miles per hour is hardly a piss missile of a pitch. So, what is the threshold? The threshold peak pressure necessary to produce ventricular fibrillation from Commotio Cordis is 250 to 300 mmHg, and the probability of ventricular fibrillation increases with pressures up to 600 mmHg. Pressure increases beyond that mark are associated with less ventricular fibrillation, but increasing contusions, myocardial rupture, and pericardial tamponade, which are consistent with Contusio Cordis. 600 mmHg is a formidable 11.60207 psi, which translated to foot-pounds of force is 1,670.69808 foot-pounds. To provide a tangible comparison, I've taken the liberty of dusting off my old punch tracker that reads wave shapes, body mass, and g-force measurements to provide a comprehensive and approximate force-pounds measurement of a given strike based upon primarily the mass and acceleration in play. Let's see if I could theoretically stop his heart. Safety first. Look at that. All of the PPE, goggles, gloves, and a lab coat for this experiment. Gotta stay safe. as you can see by the graph at the top left-hand corner, and now overlaid, it's showing peaks of speed and peaks of force. And so I just kept doing this and pulling the results until I found my maximum punch. So let's go over those results and see what they mean. So here's what we found. The threshold to meet was a mere 250 mmHg, which translates to a calm 696 force-pounds measurement. My hardest punch clocked in at a cool 25.7 miles per hour at its peak, accompanied by a whopping approximation of 1,507 force-pounds in my left cross, which is my best punch, which translates to 541 mmHg. This means that my best left cross, delivered within a 15 millisecond window, would be extremely likely to cause Commotio Cordis and would teeter on the threshold of Contusio Cordis. This very easily explains how Dim Mak legends may have been more than mysticism, and why Commotio Cordis is most commonly found at your local baseball diamond instead of collegiate or professional sports. While I used to fight competitively myself, the only fighting I currently do is for film, or to merge onto any major road in Utah. This makes Damar Hamlin's case that much more interesting and rare. Circumstances would have had to align with an unknowable 15 millisecond window, providing a pressure between 250 mmHg and 600 mmHg through football pads, and it was all caught on live television coverage of a professional sport. But if ever there were a time and a place to experience Commotio Cordis, that certainly would be the best place given the scale of the event and the talented EMS staff only a stone's throw away. Interventions for Commotio Cordis are essentially just standard evidence-based CPR. Getting prompt, high-quality resuscitation efforts gives happy endings to stories like Damar Hamlin's. Considering the 10% survivability drop per minute with delay of defibrillation truly highlights the necessity for protective equipment and emergency medical services at games that may pose this risk.